So I was going to talk about Terminator Dark Fate as part of my random film talk series, but as I watched it, my list of notes got longer and longer and longer as my jaw dropped lower and lower. For a quick bit of context, Terminator 2 is in my top 10 movies of all time. Terminator 1 is great, but I think it falls short of the masterpiece that Terminator 2 is. Terminator 3 I think is just a worse version of Terminator 2, but it's, mostly okay. Terminator Salvation I don't really consider to be a Terminator film, but it's kinda watchable even though it's pretty flawed. And Terminator Genisys is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. And in my opinion, this is the point when the series went off a cliff. So in theory, the idea of making a direct sequel to T2 and ignoring T3, Salvation, and Genisys seemed like a reasonable idea. And then they fucking murder John Connor in the first 3 minutes of the film. So having just watched the ending of Terminator 2 get obliterated, I really wasn't sure how this film could possibly recover. Like, why even bother retconning the 3 prior Terminator films if they're just gonna have John Connor get shotgunned to pieces right at the start of this one? When this happened, I was in so much shock that I didn't even consider where this Terminator came from. The alternate future reality that Skynet existed in would cease to exist the moment the chain of causation was broken, which was when they blew up Cyberdyne and then when the T-800 and T-1000 were destroyed. Skynet cannot exist after these events. I know this was retconned in Terminator 3, but Dark Fate retcons the retcon, so we know for a fact that in the timeline in which John Connor is killed by a T-800 at the start of this movie, Skynet cannot have existed in that future. Except somehow it existed long enough to send back another Terminator to kill John Connor after John Connor has prevented Skynet from existing. This isn't a time travel paradox. This is script writing from someone who probably doesn't even know how to spell paradox. This isn't something that doesn't make sense. This is an example of something that makes anti-sense. This is so far removed from what would even be plausible given the rules laid out in both this movie and the first 2 Terminator movies that it hurts my brain. And we are only just getting started. James Cameron is credited as having co-written the story, and I'm kinda curious how much input or involvement he actually had. I suspect it was extremely minimal, both because he is working on his 4 Avatar sequels that may come out eventually, but also because, as has already been made clear, the writing in Terminator Dark Fate is fucking horrible. And if there's one thing James Cameron knows how to do, it's write an action movie. Logic gets thrown out the window in this movie right at the start in the service of spectacle. Terminators are supposed to be infiltration units sent back to assassinate targets, but apparently this idea has been completely abandoned because the bad guy Terminator just appears in broad daylight in a populated area with witnesses. I guess whoever sent him back in time lost the ability to control when exactly to send him to. Characters have flashbacks simply as a lazy way to convey information to the audience. Instead of coming up with a way of organically telling us this person's backstory, the writers just wrote, "And then they had a flashback. Cool, job done, next." References are made to the original movies with all the subtlety, respect, and, well, sense, as most of the nostalgia boner moments from the last few Star Wars movies. There are also multiple action sequences with no characters to care about which only serve as a spectacle of loud noises and flashing lights. In Terminator 2, it takes a good 30 to 40 minutes before the 2 Terminators finally cross paths during their search for John Connor. In Terminator Dark Fate, there is no build-up, there is no prior character development, and there are no established stakes. 12 minutes into the movie, these Terminators are already beating the shit out of each other. Neither one of them had to really look for their target, they just both kinda spawned right on top of them so that they could get to the action as quickly as possible. Also, remember how Terminator 2 ended with a car chase with the good guys running from the T-1000 who has finally caught up with them? Well, 17 minutes into Dark Fate, we are in exactly the same situation. There is nowhere this story can progress to. The action is already dialed up to 11 in the first 20 minutes of the film. And the reason it doesn't work at all is because I don't have a fucking clue who any of these characters are. I have been given no reason to care. So this is just soulless spectacle. It's like watching a video game cutscene from a video game you've never played before. It looks kinda cool, but it means absolutely nothing. There is, of course, a degree of suspension of disbelief needed with Terminator films, with things like time travel paradoxes and liquid metal robots that can reassemble themselves, but here the writers just nosedived into absurdity. The evil Terminator is essentially a T-1000, but with 2 crucial differences. Firstly, remember how the T-1000 explicitly could not shape itself into complex mechanisms such as guns or bombs, which, makes some degree of sense. Well, this new evil Terminator can do that. because it's just better, okay? Also, it can clone itself. It can split in two and have there be two fully operational versions of itself running around. And speaking of, the liquid metal effects somehow look worse than they did 30 years ago. Linda Hamilton is probably the best part of the film, even though it feels like she is phoning it in, and it's pretty obvious she hasn't played this character for 30 years. The character of Sarah Connor has apparently been hunting Terminators since her son was unceremoniously turned into bolognese. And instead of coming up with a different reason as to why Skynet, or whatever this fucking movie calls them now, are sending back Terminators to kill the protagonist, they just used the exact same reason as the first Terminator movie. She will give birth to a son who is the only one who can stop the machines from taking over the world. I would have thought that when writing this part of the script, the writers would have maybe realized that the Terminator story is so simple that there are really only so many ways you can tell it. You can either remake Terminator 2 like Terminator 3 did, or you can try something totally different like Salvation did, at the risk of it not feeling like a Terminator movie. Or you can take a dump in your hands and then clap and call the resulting horror show Terminator Genesis. The writers of Terminator Dark Fate went the safe route and took giant chunks of Terminator 1 in one hand, took giant chunks of Terminator 2 in the other hand, shat all over them, and then started jacking off at how clever they thought they were. So if we erase the other Terminator sequels from the timeline, which is precisely what this film does, this means that Miles Dyson stopped Judgment Day from happening when he sacrificed himself to blow up Cyberdyne. This would mean that Cyberdyne would never develop Skynet, Skynet would never go rogue, and it would never decide to launch a bunch of nukes, resulting in what would become known as Judgment Day. Skynet would not then develop mechanical infiltration units called Terminators to kill the survivors of the nuclear war, nor would they ever develop time travel. This is a very specific set of causations that was prevented from ever happening in Terminator 2. In Terminator Dark Fate, Skynet has been replaced with Legion. It does the exact same thing as Skynet, it has the exact same resources as Skynet, it has the exact same motivations as Skynet. So what we are supposed to infer from Dark Fate is that at some point after the events of Terminator 2, another tech company developed Legion, which then went rogue at some point in the future, launched a bunch of missiles, wiped out a chunk of humanity on what became known as Judgment Day, and subsequently developed both Terminators and the technology required to send them back in time. This is a very specific set of causations, which is exactly the same as what would have happened had they failed to blow up Cyberdyne in Terminator 2. Which means, not only has Dark Fate totally undone what was accomplished in that film, but it also expects me to believe that the exact same string of causations, each with an infinite number of potential variables, somehow plays out in exactly the same way with Legion as what would have happened with Skynet. This movie is not only disrespectful as hell, it is fucking broken. Don't worry, we're not done yet. Dark Fate also suggests that a killing machine infiltration unit from the future, upon killing its target and having no further programming, will grow a conscience, start a family, and maintain a relationship with a woman without her realizing he is a fucking Terminator. The movie glosses over this by saying that their relationship is not physical, but does he have a job? Does he use the toilet? Does he fucking eat? Does he run out of batteries? Does he malfunction? The list of problems with this is endless, but hey, I guess we're supposed to ignore it because they needed yet another excuse to shoehorn Arnold back into a Terminator movie. The most logical and reasonable thing for an artificial intelligence to do when it has no directive is nothing. Realistically, the moment it killed John, it probably should have either frozen or shut down completely. Not walk off into the sunset, find a lonely woman and her son, grow old with them, and become a family man. And I can't believe I have to say that about a goddamn robot assassin from the future. The ending set piece, instead of being anything remotely grounded in reality, is a comically bombastic, homogenized, gravity-defying CGI absurdity. This sequence would not have felt out of place in a Fast and Furious sequel, but it absolutely does not belong in a Terminator movie. The final fight scene, which takes place after this, is actually not terrible. We get close-up, character-driven action with clear stakes, clear geography, clear motivations, and somewhat clear power balances between the three Terminators for the first time in the movie. Shame it took them an hour and 48 minutes to get there. So what makes Terminator 2 so good? It's smart, it's funny, it has fantastic characters who all grow and develop in extremely significant ways, it has a simple, unpredictable, but well-constructed plot, it features groundbreaking visual effects, both practical and computer-generated. It managed to build on the first Terminator movie to create a film that is totally different in terms of tone and style without feeling out of place. and it simply has some of the most thrilling action set pieces and stunt work ever put to film. Terminator Dark Fate, conversely, is actively retarded. It treats the audience like they are also retarded. It is devoid of humor. It has dated as hell visual effects. It has a convoluted and nonsensical yet inexplicably predictable plot. It brings absolutely nothing to the table that the first two films didn't do infinitely better, and it has totally pedestrian action sequences that could have come from anywhere. So the last thing to compare is how it fares in terms of character development. Well, Sarah Connor goes from a revenge-obsessed hardnut to a slightly less revenge-obsessed hardnut. Danny goes from a totally unremarkable and bland woman with no personality to a totally unremarkable and bland woman with no personality. And Grace goes from a brave warrior determined to save the world to a brave warrior determined to save the world. The writers of Terminator Dark Fate seem to have taken a page out of the newest Star Wars films by having the accomplishments of the protagonists in the original movies be completely undone so that they can be re-accomplished by totally new characters that are, in the case of both Star Wars and Dark Fate, uninteresting, unlikable, underdeveloped diversity tick boxes. As with Star Wars, they try to squeeze out every drop of nostalgia from the fans of the original movies whilst simultaneously shitting all over them in the most disrespectful way possible. In Star Wars, they kill off Han Solo, turn Luke into a useless, depressed coward before killing him too, they turn Lando into a pervert who fucks robots, and they kill off Leia by just kinda writing, "and then she died." They replaced these established and well-written characters with 3 new, conveniently diverse characters with 0 personality. In Terminator Dark Fate, they shotgun John Connor to pieces, they replaced Sarah Connor with a conveniently diverse and inexcusably forgettable future savior of humanity, and they replaced the T-800 with a female soldier from the future who was augmented with robot bits. Writers and producers, this is your wake-up call. You cannot simply kill off the male heroes of these stories and replace them with women. I don't care how much effort you put into telling us that these women are strong and independent and just as capable as the men. Changing this changes the entire story. And even if Grace and Danny were actually well-written characters that the movie made you care about, they still only exist because the writers wanted all the characters this time around to be women. As if I should even have to say this, the thing that made Sarah Connor one of the best characters in the history of cinema was the fact that she was believable and consistent, as well as fantastically written and acted, not the fact that she has a vagina. And just to close the door to one other possible explanation, it is, I guess, possible that Danny and Grace were written androgynously so that the filmmakers would have as many options open to them as possible when casting these roles. And then we just accidentally landed on 3 diverse female leads as a result of casting the best people for the roles. And no, this is just pure conjecture. From the very start, both of these new characters were written as women, meaning that in addition to Sarah Connor, all 3 leads of this Terminator movie were always going to be women. Is this a problem in and of itself? No. Contrary to what this film would have you believe, women can act, and female characters can be well written. Again, look no further than Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. The reason why this is a bad thing is because writers and producers seem to be of the belief that the act of casting a woman or casting an ethnic minority is an inherent good deserving of praise. If anything, I find the idea of casting someone based on their reproductive organs or skin color in order to virtue signal to the masses and try and sell your film on this basis is demeaning and exploitative. This level of miscalculated pandering is becoming more and more common, and more often than not, it seems to happen in movies that are also terrible in and of themselves. Maybe the kinds of writers who are prone to shoehorning in members of supposedly underrepresented or marginalized groups arbitrarily dictated by intersectionality are also the kinds of writers who can't competently write a script. So maybe this decision was a financial one to appeal to a wider audience, rather than one born of virtue signaling, as is often the case. But regardless, this absolutely did not pay off because this film made less than half as much money as Terminator 2, which came out 30 years ago, and that is without even adjusting for inflation. So Terminator Dark Fate is probably a 3 out of 10, maybe a 4 out of 10 movie if we take it as a standalone, but given that this is a sequel to Terminator and Terminator 2, and given how it functions, or in this case does not function, in relation to those two, I cannot give it more than a 2 out of 10. I will say, I think this movie isn't quite as bad as Terminator Genisys, but that is the lowest of compliments. It is only better than Terminator Genisys in that it gets less things catastrophically wrong, both in terms of storytelling and filmmaking, both in general and specifically for a Terminator film. But on the off chance that this review hasn't been clear, Terminator Dark Fate is a terrible, terrible movie that should have never been made. I am glad that this movie failed horribly in cinemas because movies like this are depressing, disrespectful cash grabs. There is no artistry here. There is no story worth telling that hasn't already been told infinitely better 35 years ago. There are no themes worth exploring. There is no love for cinema. Terminator Dark Fate is a soulless studio project that exists for one reason: to take as much money as possible from gullible Terminator fans who have been holding out hope for another great Terminator film since 1991. Thankfully, they failed. They rolled out this piece of trash expecting to make a quick dollar, and instead they lost around $130 million. I'm not sure how many Terminator Dark Fates it will take before the film industry realizes they can't just keep making terrible movies and expect audiences to just shut up and consume product. But the more high-profile failures like Dark Fate that there are, the better. Even though they tried to undo the descent into mediocrity by retconning the previous 3 Terminator movies, Dark Fate has still cemented itself as yet another terrible sequel to a franchise that should have ended decades ago, alongside A Good Day to Die Hard, The Predator, Alien Covenant, Toy Story 4, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, and Rambo Last Blood, to name a few. Thank you so much for checking out my review. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like, share, or subscribe, as it will help me make more videos like this in the future. If you agree with me or disagree, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.